And now we're going to jump into our broker moment, not just with Richard. I'm going to join Richard for our broker moment today. And we're going to jump into our exclusive buyer broker agreement. So let me share my screen here.
Fancy chair. Okay.
Hold on. Give me a second. It worked earlier. Oh, there we go. There we go. Perfect. Let me just hide this.
Does everybody have pens? Any pens? I can go get some.
There we go.
Okay.
Can y'all see this okay?
Yes.
Great.
And if you can't see it, you have it on your chair.
Exactly.
So you can follow along.
Does anybody need one? I have
No.
extra.
Yes. As I recommend when I teach the listing contracts class, take the blank form, guys, make notes on it. Use this as your cheat sheet so that when you're sitting in a buyer consultation, you can actually have your notes as to how this is. And we're going to go through this today very much like I do my listing contracts class. It's literally line by line in here so that not only do you understand it, but we'll be talking about how you can explain this to the buyer sitting across the table from you.
Correct. And here's what I would ask during this time. If you have questions, write your questions down and hold as many of them toward the end so that we can get through it, and then we'll open it up for questions toward the end of it. I just want to make sure we get through this in a timely manner. Sound good?
Okay.
All right.
And I know that you will all have questions to it. Now, understand, guys, that this just dropped yesterday.
Yes.
So if you go on to floridarealtors.org and you do the blank forms, you search for it, put in EBBA, this just came out. Scott and I got to look at it yesterday for the first time. So this is somewhat new to us as well. Now, the good thing is, I've been working on a customized one for our offices for quite some months. And I was really pleased to see this is very much along the lines of what I was working on. This is also very much along the lines of what Scott had been using for years in Texas.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we do have a pretty good
Which is why
understanding
this
of what's
morning,
here.
and you'll hear about it when we get to a certain point, but Richard had a thought on one way, and I was like, I don't know that I'd do it that way. So that's what I love about Richard and I's relationship. We can be really transparent with each other on how we feel about certain things when it comes to making sure your needs are met. So
Yeah, and as I was telling Scott, understand as well, when this dropped, I was sharing it with my wife, who those of you don't know, Gail. This is her 40th year in real estate. She's pretty darn good at what she does. Been doing it successfully for a long time. And of all of the people that work under me as the broker, she probably disagrees with more of what I have to say than anybody else. But that's okay.
That's called marriage.
I love her anyways. That's marriage. And she's got certain points of views about this versus mine. Uh-huh. You tell her that, Scott. You've worked with her. All right, so let's start with this. The EBBA, Exclusive Buyer Broker Agreement. And if you look down with any contract from the state, the bottom left corner, you will see where it says EBBA-7tn. Like everything I teach, this is single agency with the transition to transaction brokerage built into it. Personally, I believe this is the way every one of you should be working, especially if you're trying to show your buyer and the seller your value proposition. You are representing them. You're not representing the transaction. In doing that, you want to be a single agent. So I hope you all really understand that and take that to heart. If you absolutely don't and you just want to be a transaction broker, it's the same document, the EBBA-7tb. And the only thing that's different is the section about single agency.
Yep.
Okay? Now, line 1 on this has the parties. So the consumer is the name of the individual that you're working with. Okay? The broker is the name of your office. Keller Williams Realty Consultants.
Do not put Richard
For,
Bass.
for those of you watching this on Zoom from Fort Lauderdale or Aventura, Keller Williams Realty Professionals, Keller Williams Elite Properties. It is the name of the brokerage, not the name of the brokerage / your name. Understand, and this is an explanation that you give to your clients, that in the state of Florida, legally, the broker is responsible for all contracts. That's why the broker is what goes on here. Now, I have multiple licenses, one for each office, which is why it is not just a single name up there. It is the office that your license is hung with, is what goes in that line. Okay? So it's reading that this is the exclusive right to work with and assist the consumer in locating and negotiating the acquisition of suitable real property as described below. The term acquire or acquisition includes any purchase, option, exchange, lease, or other acquisition of an ownership, possessory, or equity interest in real property. Now that's very similar to what's in the as-is contract. Okay? I actually think that this is a better way of writing it than what's in the current listing agreement and in the contract. Those are two documents as well. The state will be changing by the time all this becomes official, August 17th, and I would expect that's one of the changes
Correct.
you'll see there.
Yeah, this makes it more encompassing of everything that you could come across.
Basically, you buy something and this agreement covers it.
Correct.
Now, the term begins on, guys, the day that you're sitting there talking to them. You date it today. Okay? And terminates at 11:59 p.m. on whatever the termination date is. Now, if I'm sitting across the table from a buyer with a consultation going, from past history, we're probably going to be working together for 6-8 weeks, maybe more. I'm going to put 90 days in here. Are you comfortable with that?
Yeah, that absolutely works. The other way that you're going to do this is in that consultation that you do with them, you're going to find out what their timeline is anyways to absolutely have to be in a property, and you're going to utilize their timeline in that same thing there. And with that being said, if their timeline is I have to be in a house in the next 6 weeks, you're going to want to give yourself a little bit of room there because you want this agreement to ultimately outlive when the property would close as well, because it's really designed to go all the way up to closing date, and you want to give yourself, so if they need to go under contract in the next 30 days, you're going to want to give yourself at least 60 days to make sure that you survive it past when it closes.
If not more.
If not
now,
more.
as in the listing agreements, it's written in here that, however, if consumer enters into an agreement to acquire a property, a contract, that is pending on the termination date, this survives the termination date and goes through until actual closing. So that's your protection right in there. Now, as I teach in the listing contracts class, question is, do you want to extend the termination date on there just to protect yourself? On the listing side, more important than on this side.
Yeah.
So yes, you can, but in the EBBA, I don't really see that it's necessary at this point. All right. Now, paragraph 3 regarding the property. It's the type of property. Keep this as general as possible. Mr. Buyer, Miss Buyer, I understand you're telling me you're looking for a single-family home. What I'm going to write in here is any residential property.
I would just put the word residential.
Residential property. And it covers you for anything. Because you all know that you've been working with buyers who start out looking for one thing and end up buying something totally different. So you want to keep that as generic as possible. Now the next line for location, you want to do exactly the same thing. You're working with a buyer who says, I'm looking for a home in Coral Springs. Fabulous, that's what we're going to focus on.
Correct.
However, what you're going to put in here, this is what Scott and I
This is where we had a little
this
disagreement.
Is what we were saying. I said, I want to keep it as generic as possible. I'd put South Florida. However, what you can put in here, what Scott and I were talking about, is I would put Broward, Palm
Yeah.
Beach, and Dade counties.
Put the counties in there, because if for any reason you were to ever have any litigation or anything, a judge
Yes.
cannot look at a map and say, here's where South Florida
Florida is.
ends. Now, we have ideas of where it is, but counties are definitive.
Correct.
But could we not just write Florida? What if
You
they
could,
had
if you wanted to cover the whole state, you could.
If you have a buyer, and really it's very generic, but how often do you have a buyer who says, I want to buy a home and I don't care, it's in the state of Florida?
I have people that bounce between the two coasts, so.
I would do, then, and I was joking with Scott, I'm going, if somebody wants to buy a house in Naples,
Yeah,
then you'd write in here, Naples.
right.
And you open it up to that. But what happens if they end up buying in Cape Coral?
May I share with you my experience on this from selling real estate in Texas? I never put Texas. And the reason being is because I wanted the people that I was working with to know that I was going to be specific with them in the areas that I was choosing to work with them in. And for instance, like I covered the greater Austin area. Dallas and Fort Worth are not part of the greater Austin area. So if it was in that area, I would always refer it out because I was out of my area of expertise. And I believe that part of our fiduciary responsibility is to cover the areas that we know well. I would be really hesitant to put the whole state of Florida on there. I would be more specific in putting the counties. Now, for you, or possible counties. Just like Richard used the example of Coral Springs, how often does somebody say they want to live in Coral Springs and end up in Boca or Parkland? It happens a lot. So you're way better off putting the counties in there. And if you have a client who is bi-coastal, even bipolar, then you could put.
Those are the customers you don't want to work
you
with.
could put the counties in both of those areas on this agreement here.
Do you have to do a modification if they end up finding something in a different county?
You would need to do a modification based upon the agreement because the agreement is made with specific counties in mind, and if you wanted to guarantee your commission, you would want to do a modification to the agreement.
Now there is not, the MOD modification is used for the listing agreement.
Right.
There's not one for this
I've
yet.
not seen or heard of that they're working on one for this, but it would not surprise me if that comes down the road. But you can write up a generic addendum that says
Or just
EBBA
add on
is
your
now,
initial? Could we do that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
As long as you have it in writing, you're good.
yeah. Frankie?
I hear what you guys are saying, but wouldn't it protect us if we put Florida? So for example, I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but I'll start working with the buyer, then they realize that in Florida, it's too expensive, right? So wouldn't you having a buyer's agreement also give you the ability to refer out to someone, let's say in Orlando?
You can always refer to anyone anytime you want to. The buyer, this buyer broker agreement is not going to ever preclude you from referring a client anywhere in the state.
Yeah. The agent that you're referring it to
Would
will
need to get
have
it.
to have this same type of document signed
Yeah.
with them when they start working with them.
And you'll have to have a referral agreement with that
Yeah.
agent.
Yep.
Okay, and then with that also being said, how does new construction work with this? So for example, if they walk into new construction,
That's still going to be
That's-
dependent
it's still,
upon
it's still
the,
covered by it.
yeah.
You're putting in type of property, residential real estate, location, Dade, Broward, Palm Beach County.
But in terms of what the new construction does, it's still going to be dependent upon whatever policies that company has in place.
okay.
Yeah.
You need
Yeah.
to make sure that they know if they go in without you, they're not getting the commission.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. All right, so paragraph 4 deals with brokers' obligations. And it's saying that they're going to provide them with our professional knowledge and skills. We're going to be discussing property requirements and assist them in locating and viewing suitable properties, assisting them in negotiating and closing any resulting transactions, and cooperate with other real estate licensees working with the seller to try and complete the transaction. Paragraph B says other consumers. And this is an interesting one because by other consumers, it's simply saying, Mr. Buyer, understand that both I and my broker are working with multiple buyers out there. There's a chance that those buyers might be looking at the same properties that you are. If that happens, I'm obligated to tell you that I'm also working with somebody who's looking at that property, but I cannot share any information with either one of you about what's going on within the transaction, what's being offered, or terms or conditions that are being discussed with other parties.
By the way, this is something you should have been doing the whole time anyways.
Yes, which is a lot of this, Scott. Yes, this is
Exactly.
common sense dealing with professionalism.
Yes.
Now, this is an interesting point because this is one of the paragraphs that Gail and I were talking about yesterday, because this continues to refer to broker.
It does.
And if, Jen, you're showing a property and Elsa's showing the same property, it's all being covered by the broker, but there's no way in hell that I would know, or that either one of you would know, that you're showing your own clients. So how's that going to work?
This is a first draft of many. This
yeah.
is approved for you to use right now. I would imagine that that part
Yeah.
will be changed.
It's, we'll see. But the point is, same in a listing agreement, when you're switching from single agency to transaction brokerage, the point is, even if you know the two of you are going up against each other on the same property, you ain't sharing anything with anybody. You're keeping all your conversations private with your clients.
For clarity in what we're talking about in here, every time you're showing a property, please do not call Richard and ask him if he knows if any other agents are showing the same property. I'd like for him to keep the hair that he still has.
No.
And here's what I want you to think about this as. If I, myself, am showing this property and I have another client that wants to see this same property and I know that I've just put an offer in on this property with another client, I have the obligation to disclose I'm representing another client, or consumer is what it says here, that has just put an offer in on this property, and I have an obligation to disclose that to you. Then if they say, well, what did they offer? You say, I can't tell you that.
Yeah, I can't share with you any more than you would want me to share with them.
Correct.
That's simple.
Yeah.
All right. Subparagraph C, fair housing. They actually deal with that twice within this document, which is really interesting. And it simply says that the broker adheres to the Fair Housing Act. And don't expect me to break those laws, because your penalties can be really severe with it.
Yep.
Okay. Service providers, I like that they've added this one. It says that the broker does not warrant or guarantee products or services provided by any third party who the broker at the consumer's request refers or recommends to the consumer in connection with property acquisition. So basically, yeah, if you're suggesting a title company, if you're suggesting an inspector, if you're suggesting a painter, a contractor, and they're unhappy with those people, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, understand that, yeah, I'm giving you names, but it's up to you to do your due diligence and to make sure you're comfortable with those people.
Yep.
Okay. Paragraph 5 is the consumer's obligations. So this is what I'm doing for you, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. This is what I expect in return. Conduct all negotiations and efforts to locate suitable property only through broker, and referring to broker all inquiries of any kind from other real estate licensees, property owners, or other sources. If consumer contacts or is contacted by an owner or a real estate licensee who is working with an owner, or views a property unaccompanied by broker, consumer will at first opportunity advise the owner or real estate licensee that consumer is working with and represented by exclusive broker. In other words, it's a very long-winded explanation, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. I'm representing you, the same as you would have as an attorney representing you in a legal case, and anyone that wants to talk to you about anything real estate related, please refer them to me as your representative.
Correct.
That's what my job is to protect you and your interests. I can only do that if you share with other people that I'm representing you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. B, providing broker and necessary third parties, i.e. lender, closing agent, with accurate information requested by broker or third parties in connection with ensuring consumers' ability to acquire property. Consumer authorizes broker to run a credit check to verify consumers' credit information. If anybody wants you to cross that line out, go for it.
Yeah.
I find that's absurd. As real estate agents, we shouldn't be running credit reports on people we're working with.
No.
Can we cross that out?
Yes.
Yes, you can.
Yes. Just like in the listing contracts, guys, there are certain things I tell you, if they want to cross it out, go for it. You don't have to call me. If there's other things they want to change, just call me to verify. This is one of those things, if they want to cross out,
And
Let 'em
in
go for it.
fairness, I believe that this portion was on there only because this also covers leases, and some leasing agents will do that on behalf of their clients. And it is not one of those things that I would advise you to keep in there all times.
Yep.
Would they need to initial?
If you
If
cross
it's
it
crossed
out,
out, yes.
And you would need to initial as well.
as with any contract, yes, anything that's changed gets initialed by all parties. Okay. And that was actually an interesting comment, Scott, because there is a part in here where it refers to the lease. However, the rest of this is all geared towards
Correct.
buyers, which is one of the strange things I found about it.
Yeah.
And what I was trying to customize is the buyer/tenant representation agreement. So,
Yeah.
Just to have some clarity, I know they're not gonna be putting commissions on the MLS, but what about rentals? Is that?
They will not be in the.
we will get there.
Okay.
We're still on page 1. We'll get there.
Hold the questions till the end.
All right, C, being available to meet with broker at reasonable times, indemnifying holding broker harmless, from and against all losses, damages, costs, expensive, blah, 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 and from liability to any person that broker incurs because of acting on a consumer's behalf. Simply means, Mr. Buyer, that if I do something at your direction and I'm sued for it, that was at your direction and you're taking the responsibility of that.
And just going back to basic common
Good
sense
sense.
business practices, if you are asked verbally to do something by one of your clients, follow it up with an email or a text. Hey, per our conversation, you've asked me to do this. I'm taking care of it for you. That way you have a timeline of what you have done at the direction of your client.
Correct. All right. E, Fair Housing Act. They're saying that they're not going to ask us to do anything that's against the Fair Housing Act. F is, please understand, I'm a real estate professional. I'm not an attorney, an accountant, an environmentalist. If you have specific questions relating to one of those issues, please seek out a professional in that field. And G simply says, you're going to make a good faith effort to perform under the terms of the contract. Because if you don't, the seller might end up coming after you. Okay. Right. All right, paragraph 6 refers to a retainer. Okay. So a retainer, there are, I can't say a lot of realtors, I know very few of them, who will say that I want a $500 retainer that you're paying me now to work with me. And if you don't buy something, I get to keep that $500 retainer.
That might be very interesting when you have investors.
Yes, I can see using that with investors. My first reaction to this is I would put a 0 in there and go, this is, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, understand that as a realtor, I get paid when a transaction closes. I'm going to make every effort I can to help you find the right property. And if I can't do my job and help you find the right property, I don't get paid.
My experience in this, because we did have a option for this in our Texas buyer broker agreement, it was more common in really, really high-end luxury property
Yes.
than it was anywhere else. And I don't know that that's something you're going to do here, yet it was way more common in high-end luxury stuff.
Yep. And yes, agents that I know out I mean, in LA in particular, Dallas area, you're working with a really high-end buyer. You're going to send a limousine to pick them up. You're going to do all kinds of special things for that buyer. Involves costs.
I've also seen
and
it-
again, I look at it as that's my cost of doing business.
Correct. I've also seen this done more on the commercial side of things.
Yes.
Because oftentimes in commercial transactions, you are going to get an attorney involved in some way, shape, or form, and it can cover some of the upfront costs that you have in those transactions.
Correct. Now, here's a thought for you. If you do take a retainer, and I'm disappointed this wasn't put into this form, because the one I was working on, I did put it on there, is the retainer will be credited back to you at closing. This document is saying the retainer's the retainer, and it's gone once you write me the check today. So if you do want to do a retainer, that's a way of softening it to somebody. And on the last page, like in all the other
Number
contracts,
13.
under other terms, you would write in there, retainer shall be credited to buyer at closing.
Yes, so the problem is that this retainer is in addition to any compensation earned.
Right.
It should be like,
Yes, so you have the freedom to, if you want to, write it in under additional terms that you'll credit it back to them at
Unfortunately, the
closing.
way that it's written right now is like if you were to go to an attorney right now and they say, I need a retainer, you would pay them, but then they'd be like, oh, by the way, I'm not crediting you any of what you just paid toward any
No,
of my
it's
future
to-
expenses.
Yeah, it's towards their hourly fee.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wayne?
Richard,
Real quick.
is there a specific reason they're throwing in the word retainer as opposed to a deposit? They both mean different things.
They do, and a deposit is a deposit. This isn't a deposit.
I know, but if
This-
most realtors are going to take the retainer, they're going to keep it or credit it to the closing.
Correct, and that's what this is about. The way it's written
Taking
here.
your money instead of putting a deposit
Th-
in on the
no.
transaction?
This is just like if you go to an attorney. The attorney's going to charge you a couple $1,000s a retainer fee, which is just to meet with you, to do all the preliminary work, and if they're going to file some paperwork up front, this is to cover their costs. That's the purpose of a retainer here. You're going to be spending X number of hours working for that buyer,
Yeah.
doing the research, taking them out, putting them in your car, spending gas money, doing whatever, running them around for a couple weeks. I want to be paid for that. Well, again, my attitude is I don't. That's my job.
Taking a $1,500
But-
retainer and crediting it back.
The money is made out to
if they
I'm taking money, I'm not taking it.
the money is made out to Keller Williams and would be processed through the office, same as any other check to you. As realtors, you cannot accept funds directly from anyone other than the brokerage. So that retainer fee would be paid to Keller Williams Realty Consultants, and then Rob and Jess would process that back to you. Again, guys, this is brand new. We've had very, very few agents who have done retainers in the past, and Jess is going to have to figure out how we run that paperwork through the office.
To answer Wayne.
Go
Wayne-
for it, Jeff.
I got you.
What?
Wayne, the retainer fee, if you say that it's, it will be deducted if they are making any purchase, you need to make sure that if they do not make any purchase, then you have something for showing everything.
If
Look.
you operate that way, yeah.
Yes.
If
Correct.
you know, I mean,
Or you could-
Some of us
That's a
don't
good
operate that way. We work, and then when we close, we get paid. If we don't close, we wasted money.
That's the point of the retainer fee, is that if they do not close, you are paid.
Or if you choose to do what I believe most agents will choose to do exactly what Richard just said and put nothing in there. You can still spin this in a conversation with them as a benefit. Hey, Alan, I really appreciate the opportunity to work with you. There's agents out there who will charge a retainer fee to work with them. I choose not to do that. So we're going to go ahead and agree that we're going to put 0 in here right now. Sound good? Great.
I think it just becomes part of the value proposition, guys, so it's not overcomplicated.
Yeah.
I'm in the same brain as Scott and Richard on this, right? There's some feel that, it's gonna be necessary to try to cover their expenses, but it's cost of doing business, guys.
Yeah.
Good.
It is,
Right.
on your taxes.
Yep. All right, let's move on with this. We've got a good bit more to cover
Compensation.
in our time frame. So compensation, we get paid. All right? Now, Okay, so here's how the compensation works. Purchase or exchange, a set amount or a percentage, or set amount, percentage, plus what you would normally charge a transaction fee. So if you're charging $3.95, $4.95, whatever it is, as a transaction fee, you would use the second set of boxes. You would leave it blank, 3% plus $4.95. Got it? Now, here's one of the specific changes on August 17th. If you put 2% down here, and the seller is willing to pay 3%, you get paid 2%. This is your contract with the buyer. This is the maximum amount of money that you can collect on this transaction. Okay? This is one of the, from anybody. You cannot collect any, there are no more bonuses being paid. There's no more money outside of the transaction. This is your contract with the buyer stating what your commission is. Now, there's a whole lot of buyers out there, whole lot of buyer agents out there who have no value proposition other than opening doors. And those people, you will see a number of them around who are going to be charging 1% or charging $595, doing whatever the amount is, because that's all they're worth. This is where I've said before, I am a huge fan of the new changes coming into effect, because I believe that the best agents out there will actually make more money.
Yeah.
And the less talented agents, hopefully they'll be out of the business soon.
So those nightmare clients that you have, send them to those $5.95 people, because then they'll really have to, they'll learn what they're really making. The other thing that I wanted to add to this, Richard, is just have the conversation in a way that don't come from fear around it. Have a really true and honest conversation with your clients. You do not need to be afraid of having a compensation conversation. Now, you may feel a little bit of angst around it at the beginning because this is new. It will become natural for you to have the conversation. Don't fear it, just have it. And come from the mindset and the mentality that you are a professional. You would never go to an attorney without an attorney asking you for some form of a commitment, at the very least, compensation most likely. Every time you go to a doctor's office, they ask you to fill out a bunch of forms when you first get there, right? What are you agreeing to? You are agreeing to compensate them for the work that they're doing. Now, unlike going to the doctor's office, I want you to actually have a conversation with people around what their commitment to you looks like. And if you make it a normal conversation, it's not going to be a big deal. If you come from it having a massive fear around it, they're going to feel that. So practice this conversation with your peers and you'll get really comfortable with it.
Now, if, to me, one of the most important lines in that section, and when you're presenting this to a buyer, what I would do, I would take a yellow highlighter and I would highlight the last line that says compensation received by broker, if any, from an owner or owner's broker for services rendered to consumer will reduce any amount owed by consumer per this paragraph. Okay, paragraph 7, the last sentence in there, right above where it says purchase and exchange. What that is saying, Mr. Buyer, is that you are agreeing that my services are worth 3%. However, I am going to do the best job that I can negotiating for you to get the seller or the seller's broker to pay that fee. Now, if what it says is if I can only negotiate that they'll pay 2%, you're agreeing to make up the 1% difference to me.
Now, Richard, I know that somebody's got this question in here. So let's say that the seller is willing to pay 3%. I have a broker agreement for 2%. Can we do an amendment to that broker agreement so that I can receive the 3%?
Nope,
Why?
nope. Guys, that is the new laws that came down. This is your contract and agreement with them. It can, and one of the big points that DOJ is looking at, part of the settlement with NAR, they're looking at it that this will help reduce the cost of a real estate transaction, meaning that they expect there will be a whole lot of realtors out there who are negotiating less than 3%. They do not want this to be an open-ended agreement where it basically says, well, depending on how good a job we can negotiate the house, that's what my commission will be dependent on. No, you're negotiating your commission right here.
Now, on the flip side of that, could somebody then later go and say, hey, you know what, they've only offered to give me 2%. We've agreed to 3%. I'm going to go ahead and
going to
forgive
eliminate the balance of that.
There you go.
Absolutely.
That we're eliminating the balance, or we just accept it?
I think that's a conversation that you have.
Well, for sure, it's always a conversation. but
I don't believe that
do
that
we
would
need
be
a
a,
document?
I wouldn't put that in writing until the situation presented itself. That's my personal opinion on it.
I mean, currently we
Yep.
don't, we just accept it.
So the original 4 documents that the state came out with 2 weeks ago were both commission-based documents, one to the other broker, one to the seller. To me, would make sense, like we talked before, that there would be a modification to this agreement where you could modify the commission. But according to everything in the judgment and everything we're reading online and what DOJ is looking at, you cannot negotiate your fees upwards. Can you credit them? Can you credit them back something? Yes, of course you can. Can you negotiate? Same as when you're negotiating a contract. Unfortunately, I know way too many of you negotiate away part of your commission, because I'm signing off on that crap all the time. And guys, every time I do sign off on that, I'm looking at you and going, where's your value proposition? So they're buying the house, they're selling the house, it's not involving you. You shouldn't give up your commission to get a deal together. You need to negotiate the buyer and seller to pay that money.
So let's talk about this lease
So let's
section
go.
real quick.
Let's keep going on. Guys, again, we're running out of time, so hold questions as long as you can. So here it also talks about the lease. So this is if you've got a buyer representation agreement and it turns out they can't find anything they want to buy, they want to lease something instead. By filling in that amount, you're now covering yourself whether they lease something or buy something. Right? Same on the listing contract. You're filling in what your sales commission is, and if you put in there what a lease is, if they turn around and say, you know what, we're not getting any offers on the house, let's just rent it. You've covered yourself for both cases. That's what that piece is for.
Okay, and then
So you
options.
have the option in case you want to buy it from the lease?
No options.
Options, don't see.
Here's my problem with that section, guys. This is for residential real estate, and in 30 years of doing this, I can't say I have ever seen an option on a residential piece of property. In commercial, it's common. In residential, it ain't.
Yeah, if you get into a situation where you're going to be lease with option to buy, that's a conversation you should bring Richard and I into way earlier than probably this agreement has even been signed.
Yeah.
If you have a client that says,
Well,
hey, I'm interested in doing this kind of a deal,
Yeah.
we need to be involved in that.
I want to rent the house for the year, and at the end of the year, I want to buy it for blah, blah, blah. It's the stupidest idea I've ever heard of for both buyers and sellers, but there are people that want to do it. And this morning, I had a conversation with another agent who used the FAR lease, or the FAR lease, and it's like, guys, you've heard me talk before. There's a company that I highly recommend. It's called Heist and Weiss. Their website is really simple. It's called evict.com. They charge the landlord $45 to do a lease that is designed and written by attorneys representing the landlord's best interests. If you have somebody that wants to do an option, you have an attorney. Heist and Weiss can customize those leases with whatever you want. And if there's ever a problem during the term of the lease because they wrote it, they'll help you out. So please use it. For 30 years, it's the only lease Gail and I have used on all of our investment properties, and it's the only lease we let our clients use.
All right, let's go to D.
All right.
Broker will be compensated for all other types of acquisitions as if such acquisition were a purchase or exchange. And then additional fees. What, if anything, would go in additional fees, Richard?
Not a clue. Because you're covering your commission, you're covering your transaction fee.
Yeah, you see, you're covering that
Now-
in paragraph A.
Yep. Now, all right, so there are some people, some of our agents I know, where they're not collecting the transaction fee. They want the transaction fee to go directly to Trevor, to one of the transaction coordinators around.
Yeah.
So they actually write into the contract that buyer or seller, whoever party they're representing, agrees to pay $495 to XYZ transaction coordination. So I could see that could go into additional fees instead of putting it into the commission up front.
Yeah, that could go
That's
into
the
it.
only time I could see any additional fees.
Yeah, that's probably it.
Yeah, as time goes on, we'll see what some of the morons out there are putting in there, and we'll be able to judge that one.
Okay.
Wayne?
I gotta ask you again. On number 6, the retainer,
We're going back.
isn't that a fee for compensation to the broker? Can't you
Yes.
put- You have to put them together, you do the same.
Those are going to be two different, it's going to be two different things.
Can you silence your phones?
Thank
So
you.
that's gonna come out the same way on the closing statement?
It's going to come out, I mean, the closing statement will come out a little bit differently if you do use a retainer and you use the compensation. There's going to be, I believe that on the Alta, it would be two different lines on there because they're
Retainer, compensation?
correct. Yeah, I believe that would probably be the case.
Well-
And like I said, I really don't anticipate
Retainers.
retainers.
No. And my opinion is, no, the retainer doesn't go on the HUD because it's paid ahead, it's paid out of closing.
Yeah, you're probably
It's
right.
paid ahead of time.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be on the HUD, but that is something that as all of this goes through, we will be finding out to the changes that are coming to the title industry and to the mortgage industry. Brian raised some really interesting issues with this.
Yeah.
Like that's gonna change.
You know, guys, there are certain things here, this is all brand new, and the only thing that you know for certain is that change happens, and I'll guarantee you this will be revised again in a couple of months.
Yep.
And we will adjust to whatever changes that we see coming up in the marketplace. Our job as leadership is to bring you that change, that feedback as quick as we can so that you can
Just like we
adjust to it.
changed the team meeting to do this today.
Right.
8, protection period. Consumer will compensate broker if within blank, if it's left blank 30 days after termination date, consumer contracts to acquire any property which was called to consumer's attention by broker or any other person found by consumer during the term of this agreement. Consumer's obligation to pay broker's fees ceases upon consumer entering into a good faith exclusive buyer brokerage agreement with another broker after termination date.
Now, that is almost word for word out of your listing agreement.
Correct.
Right.
Right? Now, in the listing agreement, I put in 90 days.
I always put 90 days in the buyer
Some people put in
ones, too.
180. And it's like, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, let me explain easily to you what this is all about. Unfortunately, there are some unscrupulous people out there who buyer and seller might get together and say, hey, you know what? My agreement expires in X number of days. Why don't we go to contract after that and we can save the commissions? Well, if the broker finds out about it, if the other agent finds out about it, they will go back and sue those people for the commission. That's all this is about. I know that's not something that you're going to do, but that's why this was put into this document. Now, it also says that if we stop working together and you start working with another realtor and you make an offer on a house that I showed you, it's that new realtor is the one that you're going to be compensating and doing the transaction with.
Correct.
Simple enough, guys.
Yeah.
This is almost word for word out of your listing agreement. Okay.
If you said that they choose to work with someone else, even though we have an exclusive agreement.
After your
After-
agreement with
after
them
the
has
agreement
terminated
expires.
or expired.
No, after he said that, he also said, now if we decide not to work together
Mhm.
and they buy a home with someone else, the other realtor gets paid.
Okay. So the same as in your listing agreement. There is actually the next paragraph is a conditional termination.
Yeah.
There's also an unconditional termination that you can give them. So, you know what, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, we're agreeing to work together for X period of time. If during that time, if either one of us decides that we're not a good fit and we're just not working out, we can cancel this agreement. Now, that means that anything that I showed you, if you go back and buy that property, I still get paid a commission on it. However, if we cancel this agreement and you find another realtor that you want to work with, and you go back to one of the properties that I showed you, that realtor is the one that's going to get paid because they're writing the contract, they're doing all the work, they're doing everything else. That's dependent on canceling this agreement or this agreement terminating.
Correct. The protection period only protects you if they do not sign another agreement with another agent. So if during that time they've gone back to, let's say, the owner and said, hey, you know what, I don't have an agent anymore. I want to go ahead and still buy this property from you. You would be protected during that time, meaning you would have an enforceable agreement that you could go back and choose to pursue litigation against them to receive your commission during that time. If your agreement has ended and tomorrow they sign a new agreement with another agent, and that agent takes them back to the property that you've shown them before, their new agent would be compensated for that because they're the ones that are now representing them, doing the contract and all of that stuff. So procuring cause only comes in when there's that gap in time between the agreements. Does that make sense?
Which is tough.
Can you control that gap? Yeah, you can choose how much time you put in there. You can only control how much time your protection period is. You can't say you have to wait 7 days before you go sign an agreement with someone else. You can't say that.
So
Yeah.
what if you have an exclusive agreement with a buyer and you put 180 days, your agreement has not expired or terminated and they're working with someone else?
Then it goes to that other.
Question is,
180 days,
Then-
that's what's
okay.
reasonable.
Okay, so turn it around and ask your question. Turn it around and ask your question if you were working with a seller. You have a listing agreement that states your listing is active until 1st of September. And all of a sudden you find out that they just went to contract with somebody else. Had nothing to do with you. What are you going to do? Well, you're going to give me a call and we're going to hire an attorney to
Yeah.
send them a really strong letter and try and collect our commissions from it. Well, same thing with a buyer. You know, you're working with a buyer, you're showing them properties, and those of you that have been in the business for a while, you know it because it's happened to you, and those of you that are new, expect it to happen to you. There are buyers out there, you're going to be working with them for however long, and all of a sudden they stop returning your phone calls, or worse, they say, you know what, we can't find anything we liked, we're just going to stop looking. And then you find out a week later, they bought a house. The old adage, buyers are liars. You know, that's usually because realtors do a pretty lousy job of asking the right questions
Exactly.
to get to the bottom line of things. But if that type of thing, it happens all the time. This document now gives you some teeth behind that happening.
Yeah.
Now, honestly, are we going to be going out and suing buyers for our commission because they breached this agreement? I don't know. We will look at it on
It's
a
going to be a
case-by-case basis.
It's going to ultimately be up to you to decide that.
You
Correct.
also need to have the
But-
proof of the.
But this gives you the teeth to do it. In the past, without this, there was nothing at all that could be done. And the old EBBA had almost no teeth to it whatsoever. So this is a really good step forward
Let's
for
go to
realtors.
conditional termination.
Okay, so this is where it's at the consumer's request. They're asking you, the broker may agree to conditionally terminate the agreement. If we agree to that, which you generally do, the consumer must enter a written agreement this effect and pay a cancellation fee of zero. Broker may void the conditional termination and consumer will pay the fee stated in the compensation paragraph less the cancellation fee if from the early termination date to the termination date plus protection period if applicable. Consumer contracts to acquire any property. What this is basically saying, guys, is if the buyer turns to you and says, you know what, we're tired, we're not going to look at houses, we're not going to buy anything any longer, I want to terminate this, it's a conditional termination, and then they go out and they do buy something, this kicks back into effect and they owe us that money.
So here's what I want you to remember. Every single one of you is an entrepreneur. You're running your own businesses. We are not going to tell you exactly how to do your business. If you choose to put a termination fee in there, that is up to you. If you choose to ask us to help you enforce that termination fee, that is up to you as well. Just understand that if there are legal expenses incurred to enforce the termination fee, those legal expenses are on you.
Why do we have that if we have like a retainer fee?
What?
If you have the retainer fee that you have completed, this is not applicable anyway.
The retainer, right?
Unfortunately, there are people
There could
that-
be. I mean, it could be.
There are agents out there that are more interested in the short-term money than in providing service to their client.
No, I'm just saying if you have a retainer.
If you're collecting
fee,
a retainer, are you also going to collect a cancellation fee?
You could.
I don't know. I'm telling you, there
I'm
are.
just saying that if they cancel, you still have the retainer fee. So
Yes.
you shouldn't even have zero. You can have zero there if you have a retainer.
It's an individual.
Elsa, my personal choice is I'd put zero in both places.
That's what I did too.
However, you know there are agents out there that are only after the short-term money. And they will put a $1,000 retainer fee and they might put another $1,000 for a cancellation fee. If you don't want to work with me, I want you to pay me. They're going to go after money any way they can.
There's an agent here in the Parkland area that sneaks a buyer brokerage agreement into all of his other documents in the hopes that people don't realize it already. So there's
Yeah.
people who are going to be sneaky out there, and you got to watch out for them. Let's go to dispute
Yeah.
resolution.
All right, dispute resolution, real simple. Just like on the listing agreement, it says that any lawsuits will first go to mediation, and if not settled in mediation, if they initial there, will go to binding arbitration. Now, one of the things I'm happy with, they took the broker signature out of this. So this is the buyer's signature and your signature. You don't have to send this to me any longer. Guys, I'm not a big fan of binding arbitration, right? I love the fact that you go to mediation first, but by not initialing this, it's simply saying if mediation doesn't work, they have the right to sue each other. And I much rather see that than putting somebody through binding arbitration. Binding arbitration, you're sitting in front of some judge wannabe who's listening to basic facts and making a ruling for one party or the other. And there is no appeal to binding arbitration. If you don't initial this, they get to go to court in which a judge will send them to mediation. And if that doesn't work, it goes back in front of the judge and they have a trial and they have a ruling. And if they don't like it, they get to go back again and again and again. Let them spend all their money doing that. So just like in the listing agreement, I teach, don't have anybody initial any of this stuff. But if you do, the buyer sign it and you initial it.
All right,
Okay?
assignment, person's bound.
Simply saying that this agreement is assigned to anybody that's related to either the broker or the buyer. So if you're working with a buyer and you find out that the buyer's uncle bought the property, I'm sorry, we're still covered. If you're working with a buyer and all of a sudden an LLC buys the property and we find out that the buyer is one of the officers of the LLC, we're covered. And in the past, we've had that type of circumstance come up where the actual person on the deed, on the contract, is not the person you were working with, and we're fighting for procuring cause, and you've got to prove as to what it was. Trevor, you've had experience with that.
Yeah, so what happens if the buyer is an individual and they've assigned it to their LLC? If that LLC, they've now assigned it to a second LLC that they're no relation to. They originally still did.
They're really working hard to.
Well, okay, now,
I've had a transaction
okay,
that's
now you're dealing with the contract now, it's not with this. So the assignment of the contract doesn't relieve any of the original parties from it if you did the assignment properly.
It's correct, it does.
Yeah, but that has nothing to do with this. This is simply saying that anybody related to or in close contact with the buyer, if they buy the property that we showed you, we're covered under this exclusive buyer broker agreement.
Right, but if that buyer, if this buyer then assigns it to somebody else that they're not even related to, they still get paid.
They're not assigning the buyer broker agreement. What they're assigning is the contract.
Yeah.
Right?
So the
So they're
question
assigning
is,
it to somebody.
But they, in order to assign the contract, they first went to contract. We're covered. The fact that they assigned the contract in, we're still covered.
Okay, all right.
Because your contract brought a ready, willing, and able buyer.
The fact
So-
that they
Because they say consumer.
assigned it to somebody else is irrelevant. We're covered. All right, so brokerage relationship, single agency. Is there anybody in here who is not 100% on board with why you would want to be a single agent?
Yeah, go ahead.
I see Frankie there. All right, so this, guys, this is what I keep going back to. A single agent creates a fiduciary relationship between you and your client. This is the same relationship. Chair, could you give me a glass of water?
Oh, sure.
Thanks. A fiduciary relationship is the same relationship a client has with their attorney, with their doctor, with their accountant, and if they have a good stockbroker, with their financial planner or stockbroker. It means that you are representing them. You put them first in everything you are doing. That's how you should be representing a client. Yeah. It's not about the transaction. It's about the individual that you're working with. Now, it spells out 9 different things, of which 4 of them really are the difference between transaction brokerage and single agency. And, you deal honestly and fairly with everybody. That's without question. Loyalty. Mr. Buyer, I am loyal to you and you alone. Confidentiality. Anything that you share with me stays with me. So if you're telling me that you're being relocated here from somewhere else and you have to buy a home within the next 2 weeks, I'm not sharing that with anybody, because if I was, that takes away our negotiating power. I'm keeping anything you tell me confident. Now, on the listing agreement, the example of that I use, if you're telling me that you're having to sell the house because you're getting divorced, thanks, Trevor. I'm not sharing that with anybody. I mean, the most egregious example of this that I ever had was 25 years ago. We had an agent that we worked with in front of our team meeting says, listen, I took this listing, it's a great listing, just bring me an offer on it. The seller has a terminal illness and he's not going to be around much longer. I was like, really? I mean, even before all of the agency laws were in effect, you're really sharing that type of stuff with other people. Guys, I am representing you and your interests. I'm not sharing any personal information you give me with anybody. Obedience. I am following your directions. Now, with a buyer-broker agreement, what directions are they giving you? The type of properties that you're going to look at, the price range you're going to look at, where it might be located, as long, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, as long as it does not break any laws or my code of ethics,
Or
I am
the
bound
fair
to
housing.
follow you.
Yep,
That's any
exactly.
laws. That's fair
Yep.
housing. That's, in particular, that's what it means. And the other one, full disclosure, that's simply saying that if I find anything out about the house we're looking at, about the seller, about anything related to this, I am bound to share that information with you because this will help you make a decision of what we're going to do. Okay? An example of it, we're looking at properties and there's a great open field behind the house. Well, if I find out that that field is zoned to be a water treatment plant at some time in the future, I'm going to tell you that. However, do you have to share that if you're a transaction broker? You still should, but do you legally have to? I don't know. We'll find out in the lawsuit.
All right, accounting for all funds.
Okay. Accounting for all funds, skill, care, diligence, presenting all offers in a timely manner. Please pay attention to that all the time, guys. Disclosing all known facts, that's your seller's disclosure. And they sign that. Now, built in here is the consent to transition to transaction brokerage. That simply means that if I or my broker is involved in both sides of this transaction, we legally cannot represent both sides as a single action. So my broker is transitioning to transaction broker. Now, we owe you, all of these items here, and you notice again, the only ones that are missing are loyalty, confidentiality, obedience, and full disclosure. What does it mean in all practicality? Well, if Elsa's working with the buyer and Jen is working with the seller, I'm transitioning to transaction brokerage. You're representing the buyer to all of your abilities, you're representing the seller to all your abilities, and you guys aren't sharing any information with each other with anything other than negotiating and putting the contract together and getting it to closing. That's all that transition means.
Correct.
Now, if you're representing both sides, if you're taking the buyer to a property, you need to be really careful with what information you're sharing with anybody. Because you have a lot of detailed knowledge of both the seller and the buyer. And if you're using it to the detriment of one party or the other, you're opening yourself up to some problems.
Do we have to disclose the single agency to the other side?
Yes, according to Florida law, if you are operating as a single agent, you need to disclose that to the other party. That means that when you're working with a buyer using this agreement, when you're showing the property, when you're talking to the other agent at any point, it's, by the way, Jen, I need to let you know I'm working as a single agent with my buyer. That's all it is. Doesn't have to be in writing. You just have to notify the other party you're working as a single agent. Now, the same thing, when you take a listing, you're working as a single agent for the seller. When the other agent calls you and says, listen, I want to send an offer over, fabulous, appreciate it. Please understand I'm working as a single agent for the seller. That's all involved within there. Doesn't have to be in writing. The law does not state that it has to be in writing, only that you have to notify him.
And then on the next page, it says,
And one of these days with all of these changes, that's one of the things I hope is changed in our MLSs. So there's actually a checkbox for the listing that the listing agent is working as a single agent or a transaction broker or no representation for the seller.
But
So-
that doesn't become part of the contract anyway.
No, but that's the disclosure part of it. I'm hoping that change is made, but I have no idea if it will be or not.
And then at the top of page 4 is the signatures for the agreement that the agent may assume the role and duties of a transaction broker.
Okay. Now, other terms. 2 things that I want you to seriously consider to put in here. You guys have 2 of the best ancillary partners I have ever worked with anywhere. I believe you are doing a disservice to your clients if you are not using them. You need to have that conversation with the seller. And you write in here, or I'm sorry, with the buyer. You write in here, buyer agrees to be pre-qualified with Supreme Lending. And you give them Lynn O'Brien's business card. You can also write in here, buyer instructs broker that Title Alliance will be handling the closing. So when you're making an offer, you're able to tell the other side both of those. As a listing agent, you should be doing the same thing on your listing. And this past weekend, I was away with a good friend of mine who happens to be an attorney, and he's also a real estate attorney, and we were having that conversation. He doesn't understand how realtors are working with a buyer or a seller, and you would want the other party to dictate to you who's going to be handling the closing, which is the most important part of the transaction. Because at the end of the day, your buyer walks away with either a great experience or a bad taste in their mouth that was not created by you, but was created by the title company or the mortgage company, if they're the ones that screwed up.
Can you just repeat that? Buyer instructs.
Well, the first one is buyer agrees to be pre-approved by Supreme Lending. The other one is buyer instructs broker that Title Alliance will handle the closing.
Thank you.
Now in Broward County, it is commonplace in the contract that the buyer pays for title. And I'm telling you guys, from a listing standpoint, why would you want to give up that right to a buyer when you're representing the seller? You should write into your listing agreement, seller instructs broker that Title Alliance will be handling the closing. So when a buyer's agent sends you over an offer, you get to go back to them as a counteroffer and say, my seller's already told me that Title Alliance will be handling the closing. Please change your offer to reflect that. When you can control both the mortgage and the title, I will pretty well guarantee you, you will have a seamless transaction.
Yep. I will too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
All right, let's go to 14, and then we got
Okay.
like 10 minutes for questions.
All right, 14, this is where, the big law changes. They highlighted it. Brokerage commissions are not set by law and fully negotiable. Broker may not receive compensation from any source that exceeds the amount or rate agreed to with the consumer. However, consumer agrees that broker may receive separate compensation from owner of the property for services rendered to owner by broker for which consumer will not be responsible. If you're representing the seller as well, it's simply saying if you get paid by the seller for doing something, you can get paid from the seller. But what you have in this agreement is what you get paid. That's what we went back to before. You cannot, if you put 2% in here, you cannot take 3%. If you put 3% in here and they're offering a $5,000 bonus, you don't get a bonus. This is what your agreement with the buyer is. You're going to get paid.
You can't go to if you're representing the buyer, you can't go to the owner and be like, hey, I'll mow your lawn for $5,000.
What's the real estate broker signature needed for the agent to be okay?
I'm sorry, what was that, Elsa?
We're not gonna know at the beginning of the
Would your
transaction,
signature
okay,
need
love
it?
us enough to give us that $5,000 bonus at the end. How are you gonna know?
You'll be working at a different brokerage if you do. Let me just put it that simple. The laws are guys, you're all on social media. You all see the crap that's out on social media. You're seeing the lab coat agents and all these other realtor sites that every time somebody asks a question, you see people with 16 different workarounds for it. Stop spending time trying to figure out how to work around it.
Just do it right.
These are serious laws and changes that are going on. We have no idea what the DOJ is going to come down with this, but they're looking at it even harder than what you're seeing here.
Oh, and they have people inside of those Facebook groups that are reporting directly back to them.
Oh,
Yeah, and
yeah.
they'll be coming
This
to
is,
your listings
yeah.
too,
The
so-
point of this is that you get, if you're taking a listing, you get paid by the seller. If you're working with a buyer, you have a listing agreement
Yeah.
with a buyer, and you're getting paid by them.
Yeah.
Stop trying to find the workarounds
All right,
with
we've got a
it.
few questions. Adil, I saw your hand up first, and then we'll come to you, Shirley.
You just answered it.
He answered
I
it?
was wondering if I had a seller, and he wants to attract, people to his house. I guess we can adjust the price for make it more that way versus saying, hey, I'm gonna give you an additional 2%.
Well, the seller always has the ability to add an additional concession that would go to the buyer in that instance as well, to make the house more attractive, to get more buyers to it. The seller always has the ability to do that. Does that answer it? Okay. Shirley?
I have 3 questions, but I don't even feel like I'm rushed.
Well, give me the first one first.
Okay, first for clarification, this is not part of my 3. For clarification on the dispute resolution, is you recommend no signatures there, correct?
Correct.
All right, these are my questions because I've always used this. I've been with KW 6 years and I've always used this
Great.
agreement. My question is the compensation, I love it because representing the buyer is just what the listing agent has agreed to. So now, if they continue to agree to a lesser amount, how do I know what they get paid? Do I ask for their agreement at closing or before closing? Like, how do we know what they're getting paid?
Why do you care?
What, you want to know how much the listing agent's getting paid?
Where, I mean, how?
I think she may be referring to how much have they agreed to pay the buyer agent in
That's
their
good.
contract. That's going to change, actually.
That's going to be negotiated
Yeah.
in the contract.
It'll
See,
be, yeah.
so you're negotiating with the, and this is, guys, this isn't in here, this comes down to practicality of how this works. So you've gone through this, they've signed this document. You're now out there showing them properties, and they found what they like. And the property is listed for $700,000. The buyer's telling you that I want you to try and negotiate with the seller to pay your 3% as well. You're agreeing how much you're going to offer on the property, and in the offer, you're going to write in there, buyer has instructed seller that buyer's broker be paid a 3% commission at closing. Something along those lines. They're going to counter that in all, part, or whatever. And we'll see the change that comes up with the new listing agreements, because the compensation portion is out of the listing agreement. But it's like, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, you have one of 3 choices to make as to how this is going to work. One, you can say, I'm not paying anybody any commission. I'm not paying the buyer's broker any commission. Well, understand, if you pick that one, it's going to eliminate the number of buyers that will be able to come and see your house. Because a lot of buyers out there, on top of closing costs and prepaids and everything else, don't have the money to pay their agent as well, so they're not going to come and see your house. Number 2 is, right up front, you're going to agree that you're going to pay X number of dollars in commission towards the buyer's broker. And number 3 is, let's wait and see what happens when they make an offer, and we'll negotiate it. So you're going to have that conversation up front with the seller. And I believe that's a change that you're going to see in the listing agreements, so that you can have that kind of compensation.
Does that answer your question, Shirley?
But Shirley, this will all,
Now the compensation is becoming a part of the offer,
correct.
which before.
At the direction of the buyer specifically, not at the direction of the agent, at the direction of the buyer. You heard the language he used. Buyer has instructed.
Yes.
Okay.
The contract cannot be used to negotiate the realtor's commission without specific written instructions from the buyer. That's always been true, and I've taught that for a long time, with all the agents out there paying out 1 or 2%. That doesn't stop you from writing into the contract that buyer instructs seller that buyer's broker be paid X
Do you mind if I come to
commission.
Elsa and then we'll come back to you? Okay, Elsa, and then Bob, we're coming to you, and then we'll come back to you.
Signature. It had, this is a.
Yeah, it should have them.
This is a brokerage agreement.
Yes.
Is it you who we need to sign every single one?
So the associate's going to
Unfortunately-
have to sign here, and Richard will have to sign here.
The associate is
You
not
just
set
doc-
anywhere, so at least we have
Yep.
our name somewhere, but it means that we need to. bother
Correct. You need to DocuSign it to me.
Really? I can't sign your name anymore?
So, guys, just like you take a listing agreement, it needs to be turned into the office. This is a listing agreement with your buyer. And yes, it's going to be a pain in the neck. And Jess, I'm sorry, you and Robin are going to be dealing with it. But every time you have one of these signed by a buyer, it needs to be uploaded into the office.
Is that both for everything, for the other ones too?
For what other one?
What other one?
Ones that we've been doing?
As of now, going forward, yes.
Fresh start, today
yes.
onward.
In the past, not necessarily.
You need
But-
to send it to him in DocuSign to have him sign it.
Just add him to the room.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's some of you that,
Bob, and then I'll come to you, okay?
yeah.
Bob?
So, quick question. This is the regular buyer's agreement now. Is there one if somebody wants just to see one home, a single
Yes,
home?
I'm going to answer
version
that super
and/or
quick.
one day,
Right here.
because they don't want to commit the long term.
You can put the termination date and the location of the property. Just put the actual address for the property right there where it says location. That's all you need to do. And then the termination date will be today through tomorrow at 11:59 p.m. if that's the way that they want to do
So
it.
just adjust it that way
Yep,
as opposed
that's
to-
going to be the easiest way to do it.
Correct.
Yes. Okay, so the question was if they just want to see one specific property. If they want to see one specific property, the way that you're going to do that is under paragraph 3, you're going to put type of property, residential, and then under location, you're going to put the actual address of the property. Okay? Lisa?
There are 3 quick questions. One, the language that you said buyer instructs seller, can you send that out to us?
Yes.
Okay, great. 2, buyer calls us, we're the listing agent, says, hey, because this is happening, I don't know if it's happening to you guys, it's happening to me a lot now. Buyer's calling and saying, hey, I want to see this property. Okay, so the single agency is not going to apply here in the contract. Is there another one of these that eliminates the single agency?
Richard?
TB is transaction brokerage,
Okay,
and
answers my question.
NR is no representation.
Got it, okay.
So if you're working, at least, and that's current as well, if you're working with the seller and they've signed the ERS 18 or 19TN, and the buyer comes into the open house, wants to buy the house, you have a choice whether you work with them as a transaction brokerage or you want to stay as a single agent to the seller and do non-representation with them.
Okay, last question, so I have, in some of my, like lower dollar properties, I have a fee, a minimum fee. So when you said, I don't know what would be put under additional fees and compensation, how can we rate that? Would that be like,
When you say a minimum fee for the entire transaction?
right, so like, let's say it's a condo for
Yeah.
$150,000, like
you
I
would-
have a minimum of $7,500 that I charge, minimum.
Yeah.
So would that go?
That would actually go under A, under compensation,
would be
and
the
you'd put the flat
The
fee.
flat fee, yeah.
Right,
I
but
had,
what if they go higher than that, because, you know, like in my other contract, it said like, I charge a minimum
Then
commission
you
of
go
3%,
into other terms.
unless it goes under $7,500.
Yeah, it would need to go under, it would go under other terms, exactly what you're talking about.
So it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah, if somebody's looking at a $75,000 condo, they're not going and buying $150,000
All right, two
something.
quick last questions. I'm going to come to Jenny, and then I'm coming to you, Dan. You're going to ask the last one, and then Dave's teaching his class.
I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but if we have the original BDA signed, do we need to change to these new ones now? The other one doesn't work anymore?
I would.
As of, yes. I would start using this form as of today.
But ones that are currently in effect,
If you get something under contract before August 17th, fine.
then have them.
I would,
If not, then have them do.
Correct.
We are still waiting to hear from the state as to what happens on the 17th.
I would
You
just
have, you have
be
existing
proactive.
listing agreement signed or this signed? You're under contract, do you need to have addendum signed by everybody at that time? Or do you need an addendum for a listing agreement or a brand-new listing agreement? They're still talking about it. Everything I've heard, those are ongoing discussions. They've not
Yeah.
said.
Dan, last question.
She answered it, I think you kind of answered it also, for buyers that we have under buyer agency agreement and/or buyers that are under buyer agency agreement that are
Yeah.
closing after August 17th. Do we need to do paperwork?
It's a matter of, are they under contract before August 17th?
Okay,
The state's going to tell us what we have to do by then.
okay.
Right now,
My philosophy is the state took a little while to get us this form. I'm not super dependent upon them getting an answer to us in a timely manner. I would be proactive and get new agreements signed.
I just, we're under contract, so
If you're under
Yeah.
contract and it's going to close before then, not a big deal.
it's gonna close after August 17th.
I think you're still fine.
I believe so.
yeah,
Don't
I
don't
believe we're
worry
still
about
fine.
this with somebody that you're under contract with.
Yeah. All right, was this helpful? Good. The whole thing is recorded. I will get it up on our Facebook group, and then I'll email it out to you guys as well. This is not the first time Richard and I will be doing this. We'll be doing this multiple times over the next month and a half. But I appreciate you guys for being here. Stick around for Dave's class. See y'all later.